Here my father is on the ground bleeding. I'm sitting on his bed and I'm watching him. And I'm like, this is a man I want to honor. And I'm hitting him. And it wasn't right. I knew that there was a better way, even in the midst of all of this pain and all of this heartache, but I didn't know how to get to it. And this realization made me, it took me to my knees. I was born in 1968 in Flint, Michigan, a city now that's more known for what's wrong with it than what has gone right. There's the water crisis, there's the decline of the auto industry, there was the drug and crack epidemic all through the 80s, and that was during my teenage years. And when I say, what was wild is that, when I grew up, Flint was a very prosperous city. I mean, it was like Palo Alto, because remember, General Motors, which was our big corporation that ran the city, it was the #1 corporation in the world. Wow. It was like Google. And so it was very abundant until it wasn't. And I mean, in the course of between probably 1 to 5 years, it went from a very prosperous place to the Walking Dead overnight. And I watched the city, all the people were moving away and it got decimated. There were drug dealers, there were gang members. I was getting beat up by those drug dealers and gang members. But what was even added to this, which made it an even more difficult problem, was in my house. My father was a very, very abusive man. And I want to say this because it just puts it in perspective. One of my earliest memories is me being around 5 years old and walking out to hear my parents arguing and watching my father ball his fist up and hit my mother in the face as hard as he could. And she's laying there, she's knocked out, and he's like, look what you made me do. Now, you have to understand, it was so traumatic because here I am, a young man, trying to figure out what being a man is. That was my main question. All during my adolescent years, it was like, what is being a man? And when I saw that, it was basically a lesson. It was like, it's his world. His world. It's might makes right. It's intimidation. It's aggressiveness, and it's fear. And you have to understand, getting beat up by those drug dealers and going out there, I was afraid to go out. And when I came home, I was even more afraid of offending my father. And, he was an alcoholic, and that was the big problem that we had in our house. And back then, it was wild, because at that time, they didn't even have a phrase for alcoholism, You weren't really a drunk or anything unless you were homeless or whatever, but if you were functioning and had a job, it wasn't considered a problem. But we had a problem. I mean, I woke up, I'll be honest, what's so crazy is that I wet the bed till I was 14 years old, simply because of the uncertainty and the stress. And I didn't know what, I would wake up to screaming, fighting, glass breaking, police coming to the house. It was just pandemonium. Yeah. And so because of that, I had this fear. And my whole thing was to beat this fear that I had, because it was something that I could hardly ever function. So I decided that I was going to get strong. I was going to work out. I was going to be this Ultraman and work my way into being this man above men, because one day I may have to kill my father. That was a realization that I had, because I knew one day, because it was just his reign of terror it was all encompassing. So that developed in me this desire to make it, this desire I call revenge. Now you have to understand something about revenge. For me, I took that, getting beat up by these drug dealers was like, okay, I'll show you. Watch when I get big enough, when I get strong enough, when I become the man, I'm going to put you in your place. Anyone that ever doubted me was one on my list. I took everything personal, okay? And my father was on my list. The people who doubted me, anybody who I felt was an obstacle in my life was on my list. But this is the thing that I discovered. You can have revenge or success, but you can't have both. And let me describe what I mean by that, because the essence of revenge is unforgiveness. Because I had a list.
Yeah.
These are the lists of people that I do not forgive. In fact, I'm gonna go to each one of them and settle my score. But the problem with that, and the problem is that you go back into a spider web. You go back into the mud. You go back into the dirt, and it keeps you there. Whereas success involves forgiveness. Success involves cutting off the old, moving into a whole nother way. You know, you understand, a revenge movie is one of the greatest movies that guys love. You know what I mean? It's like Payback and Taken, and one thing we always love is like, I'll be back. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, I'm gonna be back. I'm gonna get you, Anybody who ever wronged you, that's a movie, I'm trying to tell you, it's better than sex. It's like a fantasy that guys just go, whoa, I wish I could just get everybody back in this world. That mentality almost killed me. It took me out. I mean, I have to give it up to my lovely, lovely wife, Rebecca. She's in this front row. We have been married as of end of July, end of this month, we will have been married 34 years. And first of all, this woman put up with so much because remember, once you have that revenge thing on, it doesn't turn off. It's not just for the big things like my dad and the whole thing. It's for the little stuff. It's for somebody cut you off in traffic. It's for the family member that calls you a name. It's for, your wife said something you didn't like. So we had a term in the house, they call it petty cruise. You know what I mean? It's like, she would be like, it's petty cruise, here he is, because I was like, I'm gonna get everybody back, But, going back, I just remember when my mother was sitting there with her eyes hurt, and I remember getting her like this frozen peas, and we pull it out, she put it on her eye, and I remember dancing in front of her. And I remember trying to make her laugh. And I remember all these times that she would be laughing while she's nursing her injuries. And this is where I got my love for entertainment, for those who don't know. And the love for making people laugh, the love for doing this stuff. And so I knew that there was a better way, even in the midst of all of this pain and all of this heartache, but I didn't know how to get to it. Another thing too is that I grew up in the church, but the church that I went to was very, very restrictive. I mean, this is the thing. It was more about what we couldn't do than what we could do. I was not allowed to go to the movies, not allowed to dance, not allowed to listen to secular music, not allowed to play sports. Everything I do with my life right now, I was not allowed to do.
Yeah.
So I was like, what can I do? She was like, you can sit down, you can shut up. That's what you can do. I was like, okay. But that was also super frustrating because I was like, well, if you go to church and you got to cut off everything, then what is the point,
Yeah.
And you got to understand, I knew the phrase born again. I knew what the phrase was, but I never acted on it. It was something that you said. It was something but you didn't really activate it in your life. So I walked around super, super angry. And let me tell you, the thing about this anger is that you get a lot done. You work overtime to show that you're gonna pay people back. Like, you work double, you work triple. You will do, it's funny because I like to say underachievement and overachievement comes from the same place. You know, if you're an underachiever, you live under a bridge. But an overachiever lives under a bridge that he owns. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you work so hard to hide from everybody. You know what I mean? And I had developed this, my wife would tell me, she's like, you are just, what is the deal? You are so angry. We would go places and somebody would slight me and I would throw the guy over Rebecca's head. And she was like, you can't do this. Promise me, because you're gonna either get shot by the police, you're gonna get, or in jail, and we won't have you. Because I had this temper that was hair trigger, because it was always about showing that I was the man, showing people that I could do this. And let me tell you, it goes back to the story about my father. And we call this the Christmas from hell. Okay. And it was around 2000. Now again, when I say, you get a lot done, I had worked my way, played in the NFL for 7 years, for different teams, then went to Hollywood and worked my way into success there, started doing movies, started doing TV shows. And so we decided to go home for the holiday and celebrate some of these things. And it was around 2000, so it was early in my career. And my wife and I, we were going out to dinner, and we were in Flint, but we were driving out to dinner. And I get a call, a frantic call from my aunt. And she's like, Terry, this house is in pandemonium. You won't believe this. Your father, he hit your mother. And I said, but now you gotta understand, man. I mean, it's starting to come back to me even while I'm talking, because my kids were there. My kids never grew up around that. And I was like, wait a minute, man, what just happened? She said, Terry, he hit her so hard, her front tooth is knocked loose. Now I'm a grown man. Now I'm 245 pounds. I'm not 5 years old. Mm-hmm. And my whole MO is revenge. Mm-hmm. And I said, now he messed up. Now this is my time. Mm-hmm. I remember driving back to Flint. I told Rebecca, I said, get everybody out of the house and just leave us. And let me tell you, I beat that man within an inch of his life. And it was horrible. There was no satisfaction. I was waiting. I was waiting for it to come back. Like, there's going to be, now it's justice. But it wasn't there. I remember just feeling like this is not how it's supposed to be. Here my father is on the ground bleeding. I'm sitting on his bed and I'm watching him. And I'm like, this is a man I want to honor. And I'm hitting him. And it wasn't right. And when you're talking about this revenge thing, there's always this promise of a payoff. There's a promise of, wow, you're gonna finally get it back and everything and the score is gonna be settled. But it was never settled. And I remember leaving that, I left Flint emptier and colder than I'd ever been. And we went years after that. And it was affecting everything around me. You have to understand, with me, also part of being this image and having this male thing where you got to hold it up, you also were putting up a front.
Yeah.
It was the Terry Crews that everybody loved, and then there was the Terry Crews who was actually Terry Crews. My wife knew that. And our relationship, we were 20 years in. Again, we're celebrating 34 years, but at year 20, right after our 20th anniversary, our marriage was over. Because of this, because of the things that I did, the things that I said, the things I tried to hide, the stuff I hid behind, the attitudes, the anger, the resentment that I had. Because that's the thing, is if you always put people on a list, you're full of resentment.
Yeah.
So here I was, full of resentment, the whole thing, and I'd start arguments with her just to have them. And she was like, Terry, I'm done. And my wife has always been honest with me. And she was like, that's it, I'm out. And one thing that I realized is that in everyone's life, you're either a fool, a victim, or a king. And when you're a fool, you mess up your life. You do all this stuff, foolish stuff, you mess it all up, and then you switch to the victim phase because you got a reason why you messed it all up. And wait, the table is always full of excuses. Excuses why. First of all, my father was abusive. I came up and fled. It was the gang members. It was the drugs. It was this. We didn't have no money. I was poor. And the table was always full of excuses. And they're valid for a minute.
Yeah.
But then the king is responsible for whatever's in his world. And that's a shift.
Yeah.
That is the shift where, wait a minute, yeah, all that is true, but it's still you. It's still you. And listen, I remember asking out loud, like, why doesn't my wife believe me? And once she left, the question became, why was I lying? Two different ways to see that.
Yeah.
Why was I lying in the first place?
Yeah.
And I realized I needed to press the reset button for real on my whole life. And this is where being born again meant something. It wasn't a phrase. It wasn't just something people said. You had to be a new person. Yeah. And listen, it hit me so hard. It's funny because I was looking at all these affirmations and things that you said before the service. And it was something I would say, but I never acted on. I would be the new guy in here and then the old guy outside. Yeah. But it's like what Jesus said about you can't put new wine in old wineskins. Yeah. You have to be new. And this realization made me, it took me to my knees, Pastor. Took me to my knees. I had to raise my entire life. This was in 2010. And I tore it all down. And what was so crazy is that, Hollywood doesn't care if you lose your family. They just don't. They're like, oh, great, you got 2 more movies for you and another show. And I was like, I don't care. And it's funny because I got really, really good advice from a great, great pastor. And he said, hey man, I can't promise you're gonna get your wife and kids back, but you need to get better for you. And I thought, what does that mean? Like, you have to understand, I was doing everything for the Scooby Snack. You did good work for this and you did that for this, but to be good for the sake of being good, well, listen, that new person does good for being good. When you are born again, when you realize you are new, and it's wild because once it came to me and I realized I can reset. I don't have to behave the way I behaved. I don't have to go the places I used to go. I don't have to do what I did. I can be responsible as a king now, knowing that God is my father, knowing that I am a child of God, who can press the reset button on my life.
So good.
And I called out. I called out to God. I don't know what to do. It's funny because, in the 12 steps, the first thing you have to do is admit your powerlessness. You have to admit you don't have control anymore. And then you also have to admit that you have to know the things you can control and the things you can't. And all that revenge, all that get back, all that stuff was an attempt to control things I could never control, ever. And through years and years, and me and my wife went through tears, we went through pain, we went through counseling, we went through prayer, we went through everything, and we were able to rebuild our marriage stronger than ever. And I'm thanking God every day that our marriage was rebuilt. And one thing that I knew I had to do, because I had to really address this revenge thing. I had to really address this get back thing. And I said, okay, how do we address it? God, tell me what to do. How do we do this? Forgive. The word forgive. You can say it, but doing it?
Yeah.
Whoa! Remember, I had the list. Pulled the list out. And it was like, start marking people off the list, not as revenge, but as forgiveness. Man.
Wow.
And I decided that my father was first on that list.
Wow.
And I said, I gotta forgive him. And I said, how can I even open this up? How can I even begin to start this conversation? Because it's too ugly, it's too dirty, it's nasty. And I said, okay, what I'm gonna do is think of one thing he did for me to thank him for. One thing. And I said, and there wasn't many on the list. I was trying to think. My head was spinning, right? I'm going, man, this guy made my life a living hell. What can I think of? And I went, I said, I'm going to thank him for having me. That's it. That's it. And I called him up. I will never forget this day. I called him up. And let me tell you, it's hard to even fit your mouth around the words because the feelings aren't there. But I said, remember, being born again is not something you say, it's something you do. And so I said, do this. And so I said, man, Big Terry, because that's what we called him. I'm little Terry, he was Big Terry. I said, Big Terry, thank you so much for having me. Because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't exist. And he cried, and he apologized, and he said, I'm sorry for putting you through what I put you through. And I eventually flew to Flint, and I gave him the biggest hug that we ever had in my life. Now, I'm not gonna say our relationship is that good, because it's still not. But the big thing was, what I thought was going to work was the beat down. But what really worked was the forgiveness and the hug.
Wow.
And now, no matter what decision he makes, because that's not what I can control.
Yeah.
But what I can control is the fact that I am free.